Well, welcome, everyone. I'm Rolph Blythe. I'm the Executive Director at Arion, and it's my extreme pleasure to welcome you all to the celebration of our first book of 2026, Declare a Civic Gospel. You'll hear a lot about this project tonight, an artist book collaboration between Arion Press and Thomas Jefferson's Monticello. But I would be remiss before getting to the project if I didn't begin by thanking the many people who made it possible. From craftspeople to donors, there are a staggering number of contributors to this project. So you'll have the opportunity to hear from many of them tonight. But first, I'd like to thank our dedicated board, including Sissy Swig, Claire Spate, and VR Feroz, and our emeritus directors, Nancy Abbey and Ned McDonald, who are in the audience tonight. An extra special thank you to Stanley Gotti for your extraordinary help in hosting this special event. I'd also like to extend our profound gratitude to the generous donors of the 56 Signers campaign who brought our declaration to life. I'd like to give a second extra special recognition to Claire Spate, who was our first funder and whose leadership and generosity helped launch the project. And then finally, I would like to recognize Arion's bookmaking team, whose craft makes our mission possible. If I could ask you guys to stand up as we call out the different departments. In the foundry, we have Brian Ferret and Chris Bronco. In the bindery, we have Megan Gibbous, Jocelyn Lee, Diane Newell, and John Demerit, who could not be here this evening. And in the press room, Joel Benson and our creative director, Blake Riley. Great. So Arion's mission is to preserve and celebrate and champion the traditional book craft in digital culture. We're the last printer in the country to make books entirely by hand, from comma to cover. Just 2 floors down in this building, Arion operates the country's last continuously operating hot type foundry. So that very special resource, paired with Arion's letterpress print studio and handbook bindery, allow us to convey to thousands of visitors a year the cultural importance of physical books and the artisans that make them. During the 5 years that I've run the press, I can say that no project better encapsulates the power of print and the mission of the press more completely than Declare. This is because, apart from offering fruitful terrain for literary and artistic expression, the Declaration, the document that founded our nation 250 years ago, was ratified by an act of printing. Jefferson, who wrote the first draft, called the document an expression of the American mind. Lincoln called it the electric cord that will link patriotic hearts as long as the love of freedom exists throughout the world. And 250 years later, Arion Press, partnered with Monticello, follows the spirit of Jefferson and Lincoln's comments to create a fresh exploration of the Declaration by inviting a symphony of leading American writers, artists, and poets to reflect on our country's founding words. On one hand, you could say the scope of this evening may appear quite small. We're gathered to celebrate the release of a handmade artist book, limited to 250 copies, and hear from a few of the artists and writers who participated in the project. But the cultural impact of Declare, as many of you who have been attached to it for almost 2 years now know that the impact is much wider and more ambitious than anything Arion has attempted in the past. Tonight is the first event in a national series of talks, gatherings, and educational activities sharing Declare's mission and message across the United States. We'll be holding events in Monticello, New York, Denver, and other cities to be announced. And our public launch is scheduled right here in San Francisco for June 13th. Beyond the talks, Declare allows Arion a host of extensive educational activities across the country that will offer thousands of students the chance to print and sign their own copy of the Declaration broadside. And in May, Arion will expand beyond the artist book format to co-publish a trade edition of Declare with Monticello, where the fiction, essays, and verse will be available in a more affordable format, allowing us to reach a broader audience and spark further conversation and debate. So a few housekeeping items before we begin. Following the program, you're all invited to join us downstairs for a reception in the gallery to see the book and continue the conversation. You can reserve a copy of Declare or sign up for our annual subscription in the gallery after the talk. We're offering a special deal tonight where you can sign up for both an annual Arion subscription and Declare as a bundle deal today. And now I'd like to just walk us through the run of show. Next, Ted Gioia, Arion Program and Development Director, will speak about the craft of making Declare. The heart of our program tonight will be a conversation, the Declaration's influence on the American imagination between artist Han Hamilton, poet laureate Arthur Sze, the librarian of Monticello, Endrina Tay, and Arion's creative director, Blake Riley. And it will be moderated by Andrew Davenport. The evening will conclude with a poetry reading by Arthur Sze, Forrest Gander, Orlando White, Major Jackson, reading their poems from the project. And again, I want to welcome everyone. We're so glad you're here. Thank you for being a part of it. And now let me introduce Ted Gioia.
My name's Ted Gioia. I'm a director at Arion Press, and I'm here to say a few words about the craft behind tonight's book. America is a country founded by printing. The United States were inked into existence when John Dunlap printed the Declaration of Independence as a broadside in his Philadelphia workshop on July 4th, 1776. Disparate colonies were forged into a nation through ink, paper, and press. And in this sense, American independence was not simply declared, but crafted. A quarter millennium later, Arion reaffirms our nation's founding pledge and the revolutionary power of craft with another act of printing, Declare, a civic gospel, an artist's book which assembled hundreds of American hands to create a printed testament to our country's inaugural words. 50 artists, authors, poets, and artisans across 20 states came together to craft a gospel that honors the Declaration's past while interrogating its future. Now, this book began with some of the most storied wood in American lore. We heard about two legendary tulip poplar trees which once flanked Monticello's portico and even appeared on the back of the $2 bill. These titans were the last trees planted at Monticello in Jefferson's lifetime, likely by Wormley Hughes, the enslaved principal gardener on the estate, but they were cut down in the 2000s after growing hollow. Last year, a storm knocked over another tulip poplar in the Jefferson family cemetery, as if fate wanted to ensure there was just enough material to make an artist's book. And indeed, this salvaged wood became the seed material of our edition, and transforming these dead trees into vessels of a living democracy became the guiding metaphor of Declare. But how to make a book worthy of this material and this moment? Well, we started with three disparate elements, unified by one core concept, gathering an optimistic polyphony of American perspectives across discipline, geography, and politics to render an expression of the American mind at this singular occasion. Now, the first element is a volume of essays, of new essays and poems by leading American writers, edited by Monticello's president, the celebrated historian Jane Kaminsky. Now, no single citizen can offer a definitive interpretation of the Declaration, so we invited a chorus of essential American voices, from poet laureates to four-star generals, to reflect on our country's founding credo. Pieces run from General James Mattis's exhortation on civilian control of the military to Rita Dove's haunting acrostic. And these are collected in a neat volume whose binding borrows its shade and shape from Jefferson's own personal Bible, and whose intimate octavo format is modeled after Jefferson's preference for books of a handy size. The second element is a suite of 10 medallions made from historic Monticello cemetery wood, engraved with visual commentaries from notable American artists, interpreting some aspect of the Declaration. The medallions are modeled on friendship medals, exchanged as symbols of alliance and kinship in the early United States. Their iconography soars for a sweep of tones and temperaments, from Chip Kidd's mischievous lampoon to Stephanie Sujuko's elegiac meditation on the unfulfilled promise of the Declaration's opening word, when. And the third element is a modern broadside of the Declaration's preamble. Arion commissioned acclaimed type designer Trey Seals to create a contemporary rendering of the preamble. While visiting Monticello's Declaration exhibit, Trey overheard a child ask their parent what the Declaration's first line meant, since she could not read cursive. And the lesson and the mandate was clear. Trey's type treatment would place legibility over ornament, so we could read the words of our own liberation. For the verso, Trey adapted an early emblem of national unity, the chain of states created by Benjamin Franklin for the $3 bill, to forge a fresh symbol of solidarity. And finally, Trey wanted to inject dynamism into the Declaration, since the work of democracy requires participation, not just passive reverence. So our preamble is encased in acrylic with a mobile stand, asking readers to set up their own display. Those immortal words are waiting for you, but it's your choice where they should stand to illuminate your life. And now we faced something of a design challenge. What could hold these trio of wildly disparate elements, these myriad voices and visions of America? And our answer sprung from tradition. The Declaration was first written on the portable desk of Thomas Jefferson, and its birthplace offered a blueprint for its future. Channeling 18th century woodwork, including the prodigious collection of bespoke desks and furniture and woodwork at Monticello, Arion devised our own intricate architectural box designed to give depth, dimension, and dignity to our nation's founding words. Now, there are 4 layers in our box. The book on top, nested in a tray adorned with an image of a tulip poplar. And the second and third layers are pull-out trays of the medallions, while the bedrock of the box is the Declaration broadside itself. Unpacked, the atomized elements unfold into a luminous constellation of American thought and imagination. But within the box, separate voices and materials meld into a cohesive whole, e pluribus unum, in 9.5 pounds of paper. But this box's humble exterior conceals the extraordinary labor and backstory of its birth. There are 38 distinct fabricated parts in the case. 6,325 pieces of board, chopped by Megan 4 times each, into, as she told me, 25,300 individual precise panels. 440 yards of cloth cut into over 3,000 pieces by Jocelyn. And fabric, board, and bolt were chopped, sanded, and sized into the precise building blocks of our Declaration. And here, a metaphor becomes manifest. Raw materials are crafted into the durable cornerstones of a democracy. And in this way, the process of making Declare by hand offers a metaphor and a model for the ongoing labor of electoral democracy. 20 craftspeople from coast to coast came together as binders, printers, restorers, woodworkers, typecasters, and fabricators labored to fashion this gospel. And this handwork is our humble attempt to dignify and even, dare we say, sanctify the words within. But now we must ask, why care about craft at a time like this? Why care about the minutiae of boards and bindings at a moment when our nation faces such turmoil? And the answer, because craft is a manifestation of how intention, skill, and perseverance can mold small materials into large meaning, whether you're crafting a book, a box, or a nation. And indeed, the courage to believe we can craft a country anew is quintessentially American. And this brings us back to the subtitle, A Civic Gospel. Now, we went from many nouns and names to figure out how we should describe this physical book, a duplex, a cabinet of curiosities, but all of the most accurate may be covenant. Because there is one last detail I want to share with you tonight. The inside lid is engraved with 14 words. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. The Declaration's last line. And for Americans, this is the eternal pledge. And this book, this civic gospel, is our pledge, our crafted covenant, wrought by over 100 American hands to enliven that electric chord at the heart of the Declaration, to make those familiar founding words ring anew in your ear. It is an invitation to feel the force of our nation's inaugural promise, both its feats and its failures, and discover afresh what country, what America we might craft together with this credo guiding our hands. And now I am pleased to introduce the members of our panel. First, we have Endrina Tay, who is the Fisk and Marie Kimball librarian at Monticello, where she leads the Jefferson Library. Her research focuses on reconstructing Jefferson's reading universe, leading to important breakthroughs, such as the rediscovery of 80 previously unknown volumes from Jefferson's library at Washington University in St. Louis. Blake Riley is the creative director of Arion Press, and he will spare me reading him a paragraph-long bio, but I assure you, he is the most interesting person on this panel. Arthur Sze is the 25th U.S. Poet Laureate of the United States. He is the author of 12 books of poetry, including Into the Hush, The Class Constellation, and Sight Lines, which won the 2019 National Book Award. His honors include the Bollingen Prize for Poetry and the Ruth Lilly Poetry Prize. Anne Hamilton is an acclaimed visual artist whose work centers on metaphorical structures and material processes of textiles and takes form as site-responsive installations, performance collaborations, print media, and public projects. Her many accolades include the National Medal of the Arts, the Heinz Award, and the MacArthur Fellowship. She represented the United States at the 1999 Venice Biennale and has exhibited around the world. And our moderator is Andrew Davenport, the director of the Robert H. Smith International Center for Jefferson Studies at Monticello. He is a historian of the early United States, slavery, and African American history. Andrew is currently working on a book about the enslaved families who were sold from Monticello after Jefferson's death in 1826, drawing from his own family lineage, which traces back to James Hemings, Jefferson's tailor and brewer. And Andrew has been a crucial voice guiding this project since literally the first call 18 months ago, and lending his knowledge and nuance to shape Declare's discussion of Jefferson's legacy has been indispensable to the project, and we're very pleased to have him here.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Oh, terrific. What an inspired occasion to be here in San Francisco with Arion Press, with so many champions of our shared work, to be with distinguished American artist Anne Hamilton, the Poet Laureate of the United States, Arthur Sze, the distinguished American librarian Endrina Tay, and the creative director of Arion Press in Blake Riley. Just a quick note. James Hemings isn't known to have had any children. I'm a descendant of Peter Hemings, his brother, who was Jefferson's enslaved tailor, brewer, and also a chef like his brother James. And that story inspired me to become a historian, to learn from Pulitzer Prize winner Annette Gordon-Reed, to learn from the historians of African American history and Jefferson studies at Monticello, who I menteed with, and inspired me to become an historian. And I have the distinct pleasure of collaborating with any number of external partners, but I have to say that this project, 2 years in the making, is a work of such intricate labor and such energy, and really exemplified by the work of Ted Gioia and Blake Riley and Rolph Blythe and Caitlin Fitzpatrick and Sienna and so many others here. Walking around this afternoon and seeing the press in 638-degree molten lead, I can't believe that this place exists and you do the work that you do, because it's so extraordinary. And as Ted mentioned, the work, the craftsmanship it takes to produce a volume like Declare, as intricate as it is, as complicated and as complex as it is a parallel, is a metaphor for the very hard work that we do as United States citizens, and the work that we need to do always to refound our nation, to learn from the example of the founders, and to pass this great American experiment along. So thank you, Ted. Thank you to Rolph, to Blake, and to the entire Arion team, but especially our thanks to you for sharing your time here with us this evening. So without further ado, I'm going to turn to Ann Hamilton here and say, and ask you, Ann, why did you say yes to this project? And what is the backstory behind your concordance? And what has the founding words of the United States meant to you as a leading American artist?
Well, that's 3 really complicated questions. I mean, I think I wanted to start by saying that I've always thought about books as democratic objects. The way they're made, the way they pass, the way we can share thought that connects the near to the far, the writer to the reader. And you don't know, it's like a stone in a pond, you don't know where those words are going to land. And so, of course, I said yes. And I think it's in part because in my own work and other forms, I've been thinking a lot about civic space and what kind of civic space we make and construct and allow now and host. And I had actually worked with the preamble to the Declaration when I did a project for the World Trade Center subway station in New York. It's like a chorus of words you learn in grade school. We hold these truths to be self-evident. And it's the we, but the word we only occurs once in this document. And so I became very interested in the legacy of other legal documents that actually form the society we live in and the basis of law. And I look for we and other documents. So a concordance is the structure and the occurrence of the word we in the preamble, but also in other legal documents that I mined for this structure, the wood piece. And does everyone know what a concordance is?
No, Phyllis.
Okay. It's the most fabulous non-narrative way of organizing a book. So a concordance takes the contents of a book and it alphabetizes every word in the order in which it occurs in the book. And if that runs down the center of the page, like the spine of your body, then what's the horizontal line is the accompanying context of that word. And I think of it as a weaving. I come out of textiles. My first hand is a sewing hand. And I think about how we read is maybe in some ways a form of drawing. That we each read, I think, very differently, and we carry those words with us in different ways. And so I was very attracted to the idea that the words are an object, and think about what words do we need in our pocket now to carry forward. So it's about the possibility of carrying forward the ambition that these words hold, and it's still something that is obviously a contract that's being made. Yeah, I think a lot about the importance of words, how they make our imagination for what might be possible, and what is the form these words now take. And so that's why I look to my poet friends. But yeah, did I answer your question?
You bet. And speaking of the responsibility and the shared civic power that our framing language, our founding language has, I too will turn to our poet friends and ask you, Arthur, what do you see as the civic duty and the role of literary citizenship as poet laureate of the United States, and what that means today, the 250th anniversary of the United States? And also, if you can talk a little bit, because ecology runs through your entire career and your oeuvre. I think that's really relevant, especially given this revitalized tulip poplar that is a stand-in for our revitalizing living democracy.
Thank you. You're giving me a two-part question here. And I think I'll start by talking a little bit about literary citizenship and civic citizenship. And as the U.S. Poet Laureate, I think words are vitally important. And the literary community is one that is a living and ever-growing and transforming web. So as U.S. Poet Laureate, I have a signature project which involves poetry and translation. The book is called Transient Worlds, and it brings 23 poems from 13 different languages together, ancient and modern. And instead of an original source poem and then one translation, I present multiple translations of the same poem to talk about how no one translation is definitive. And so I see this as part of a literary citizenship because I'm trying to bring forward a conversation, and that involves readers, writers, people who appreciate poetry, people who might even be a little scared of poetry. This book, for instance, presents a crib of an ancient Chinese poem in 3 translations, and then invites the reader to make their own translation. And someone was on an airplane actually from Hawaii to Seattle, and she emailed me and she said, I had a advanced copy of your book. I was sitting on the plane. I had 4 hours. I read the first, section, and I decided to make the first translation I've ever made in my life of an ancient Chinese poem into English, a poem by Tao Chen. And she was so excited when she got off the plane, she emailed it to me. And I thought, well, that's part of literary citizenship, of bringing this conversation of people into the conversation of what literature can do to make us notice, be more aware, to treat language and to treat each other with care and respect. And it involves, as poets, it's part of a whole ecosystem. So it's not just poets. When you're writing, you may be writing in isolation, but you're also writing from the deepest part of yourself. And in that sense, you're carrying on a struggle that connects to everyone. So you need editors, you need publishers, you need readers. Literary citizenship for me as U.S. Poet Laureate means going to a local poetry reading in Santa Fe and not saying, oh, well, I'm, too busy or whatever. It means giving for free a poetry translation workshop that I did for Native American students at the Institute of American Indian Arts. They invited me to give a poetry reading, and I said, fine, but I want to add this on just as a gift. So the possibilities and connections are endless. And in terms of ecology, I like to think that writing a poem, I'm trying to use respect and care and let things be themselves. I'm not trying to push them into a position that fits a political point of view or a particular aesthetic point of view. In trying to let each thing be itself, that's an inherently ecological position. And it seems to me in the making of this book, in the conversation we're having, this is an ecological conversation. The book is being made out of these tulip poplar trees. We're coming from very different backgrounds, but we're sharing our expertise, our passion for this project.
I really appreciate that. And in thinking about how these dead trees have become the central feature of this artistic publication, it's a real testament to transformation and the powers, the catalytic powers of turning something old into something new, which is the work that historians at our best do every day. And it's the work that we as citizens at our best do every day. Endrina, would you mind talking to us about the role of books and literature in civic society, and in particular, the role that books played in Jefferson's life, and his vision for his library, his thousands of books that he owned, that he sold to form the Library of Congress, how he organized his books. Tell us about Jefferson and books. You are the living authority on Jefferson and his libraries.
Well, thank you, Andrew. I could go on and on talking about Jefferson's library, but I'm going to try to just cherry pick a couple of things. I think among all of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson owned probably the largest collection among all of them. He owned in his lifetime between 9,000 to 10,000 books. He regularly recommended books to other people to read. He borrowed other people's books, so probably the number of books he read in his lifetime was higher than that. In terms of organization, he used a Baconian system, memory, reason, and imagination. It's from the faculties of the mind from Bacon's Advancement of Learning, and it corresponded to Jefferson's own categories, which was history, philosophy, and fine arts. So he collected widely. He loved, he loved Homer, he loved Horace, he loved history, Tacitus, Thucydides, he loved Shakespeare, he loved Milton. His granddaughter said that books were at all times his chosen companions. And one of the things, we're in a room of readers and people who appreciate books, so I'm going to read one of his quotes about what he liked. He said, "I like good bindings and handsome without being over-elegant for use." And then he wrote, "I disclaim all pompous editions and all typographical luxury, but I like fine white paper, neat type, and neat binding, gilt and lettered in the modern style." So he loved books, not just for their contents and reading and interacting with them, but he loved them as objects. And one of the things that, he continued to do throughout his life was to encourage reading, encourage public libraries, because he believed that in order for a democracy to thrive and to survive, it needed an informed citizenry. People had to understand what was going on. They needed to be literate. They needed to be able to have civic discourse through information that was accurate. And one of the things that I would read a quote that he said in his notes on the state of Virginia. He argued that public education must include the study of history to ensure that citizens can effectively secure democracy. He wrote, "History, by apprising them of the past, will enable them to judge of the future. It will avail them of the experience of other times and other nations. It will qualify them as judges of the actions and designs of men. It will enable them to know ambition and under every disguise it may assume, and knowing it to defeat its views. And then in his final years of life, he emphasized the importance of public discourse and the free press. And he wrote, "The only security of all is a free press. The force of public opinion cannot be resisted when permitted freely to be expressed." So I think in Jefferson, we see someone who really believed in open discourse, in being informed by reading, through the act of reading. And for him, as a man of the Enlightenment, to open a book was an act of enlightenment. So that's what I would say.
And can I ask a follow-up, Endrina? Could you talk a bit about the influence of Jefferson's reading on the first draft of the Declaration and the Declaration overall? Ted mentioned it's an expression of the American mind, of course, but Jefferson doesn't have access to books when he's on 7th and what was then High Street in Philadelphia. And he only has a couple of days to write the Declaration. What's he drawing from, and how is he distilling this magnificence? And of course, he's accompanied at the time by the 14-year-old enslaved valet, Robert Hemings, who's probably the first person to hear the Declaration of Independence read aloud while Jefferson's reading it to himself.
Yeah, that's a good question. In fact, in 1825, there were people who were recounting, the Declaration as they were getting ready to celebrate the 50th anniversary. And he replied by saying, actually, he didn't draw it from any text he himself wrote, but it was really a reflection of what was happening around them, that the founders themselves were familiar with these ideas of republicanism, of democratic ideals. He was drawing from what they already sort of innately knew. So he himself said, I didn't draw it from anywhere.
From the conversations that he's having in Philadelphia and in Virginia, from the books that he's reading, from the broadsides that are being put out by printers like John Dunlap. Blake, what does it mean for you to see this project finally complete? In the years since we first met, I've had 2 kids. So, it's been a long time coming. I haven't slept, by the way. What does it mean for you to see this project in the world, and how do you connect it to the craft of being an American, the passing on of the torch of craftsmanship from generation to generation? I'm sure that you were an apprentice to a master creative designer. Talk to us about this project and your love.
I don't think at the beginning of the project, before your 2 children were born, that we could have, or we were able to anticipate the moment in which we found ourselves. And this was, I think, the source of the greatest surprise in working on this project was that the cultural zeitgeist caught up to us in a way that all of the contributors responded with a incredible passion and outpouring, the way in which they embraced the ask. And I can speak primarily for the artists who became involved, was so deeply engaged and urgent in a way that it made our sometimes seemingly quaint endeavor of printing slowly by letterpress seem crucial in the moment, almost a reenactment of that original printing of the Declaration. The craft aspect is an ongoing conversation at the press, and this happens on any given day on many different levels, as we kind of try to define what that is, particularly in this 21st century, particularly in this tech-centric city in which we live, working literally below a robotics laboratory. I think that there's never going to be one definition, of what that is. But I think all definitions are going to, at some point, come back to this issue of materiality. And Arthur, you kind of touched on that a little bit about the kind of ecology of the materials. And earlier today, you said something I thought that was so interesting, which is you remarked that touch is the only sense that all species have in common. And that's very central to what we do. We call it material engagement, where we are very interested in working with materials, getting them to speak to each other, choosing them carefully, balancing them against each other, feeling their weights and counterpoints, all to kind of bring that moment kind of to its fullest realization, right? And I was thinking recently about my painter friend Helen, who's in the audience with us tonight, recently referenced a line from the German Romantic poet Eichendorff, who wrote something like "Schläft ein Lied in allen Dingen." And for anybody in the audience who actually speaks German, any translations?
Inside everything is a song.
Exactly. Inside all things, there sings a song. And that, I think, that's really become, I think, kind of more poignant in this context. And I'll push back, Andrew, a little bit against the comment that you and Ted made about the trees being dead. Because as anybody in the bindery, works in the bindery will tell you that when you're working with organic materials such as wood or leather, they resonate still. The animal skins can actually be very difficult to work with sometimes because they are so strong. But this wood was a phenomenal opportunity. And, we're so grateful to Monticello for giving it to us, because we can trace this material now, this material engagement that we're so interested in, to a specific tree, and that is an extraordinary moment, because now we can make that tree sing, right? And that's kind of, I think, surprised us as well, was the way in which the artists have all given voice to this living tree, and created a connection that goes forwards and backwards through time. So, we have a direct connection now to this moment, to this declaration, to this proclamation, this gospel that combines us as a people. And we can, add our voice to that. So, in the spirit, as, Rolph mentioned, of the polyphony of voices, we see that, that the material, the conduit of this tree is has the power to amplify that for us, to bring us in touch with that kind of original moment, and hopefully inspire us to add our own voice.
We had bi-weekly meetings with Arion throughout this 2-year-long collaboration, and occasionally Monticello colleagues and I would get off the Zoom and we'd Teams each other, Microsoft Teams each other, and say, "These guys are really into the wood." And I've actually I've been accused of cutting down one of these tulip poplars just to give it to Arion. I didn't actually do that, but they really had an insatiable appetite for this historic wood, which is deeply meaningful, planted, like Ted alluded to, by an enslaved gardener named Wormley Hughes, whose wife, Ursula Granger Hughes, was trained in the president's house as a chef, and she was sold after Jefferson's death, as were some of her children, as was one of her grandchildren. And knowing that this tree, which lasted still lasts a couple hundred years later, and knowing some of Wormley Hughes's descendants who gather at this trunk and who can see this new tulip poplar, now 15 years old, growing from its ruins, is a remarkable metaphor for the work that we all have left to do here in this country. It's not always the easiest road to hoe or to understand. It's work worth doing. It's a craft worth taking up, that of the craft of citizenship. And it's inspiring to dig down when times are challenging, to learn from one another, to read and to imbibe and to spend time in conversation with all of you. Thank you very much. And I can't wait to hear poetry by Major Jackson and Arthur Sze and Forrest Gander, a couple of whom I've had the chance to take around Monticello. And if you haven't been, I hope that you'll visit us soon. I know that there are a couple of people coming next weekend. Over now to the poets. Thank you.
It's a great pleasure to be here this evening to be reading the poem that I wrote in response to, in thinking of the Declaration of Independence. And after a number of tries, I decided to just tell a kind of personal journey using the phrase, the pursuit of happiness. And before I read the poem, I just want to share, because many of you may not know, there's a particular place in Santa Fe, New Mexico called Acequia del Llano, which is mentioned. And Acequia is an irrigation ditch. There are actually 4 that run through the city of Santa Fe. And the irrigation ditches are communal in labor. So actually the water just started on April 15th and it'll run for 6 months round the clock. And what happens is all the members who have water rights clean the ditch as a communal project. And then the mayordomo, the ditch manager, gives allotments of times during the week when each family can draw water off of this ditch, which at the end of the ditch, it runs from the reservoir at a high level and then drops into the Santa Fe River, so no water is ever lost. But in that irrigation passage, each family has irrigation gates. They can drop a gate, and they can then use the water that flows downhill to water their orchards and their gardens and fields and whatever. And then when their time is up, they lift the gate and the water goes on to the next person. And so it's a thing that happens half of the entire year. This poem is called By Way Of. I cleared debris out of the irrigation ditch and stopped to examine a pincushion cactus with its myriad overlapping mesh of spines. At the lab, they depressurize containers of tritium and reassure the public the radioactive emissions are going according to plan. The Indian paintbrush has scarlet blooms. Dalmatian toadflax has yellow scattershot patches. A magpie squawks from a nearby pinon, and I ruminate on pathways through thickets that brought me here. I could have been mapping air vectors to anticipate the movement of contaminants if a dirty bomb is detonated north of Manhattan. But over 5 decades after I turned from equations on whiteboards, I mull the pursuit of happiness, check the water flow in the Acequia del Llano while strawberries redden, sweeten in the garden.
Because I can embarrass myself in any situation, I did it immediately tonight when Rolph Blythe was thanking people and came to Arion Press itself and said, I'd like you to stand up. I immediately leaped to my feet, thinking that we were all going to give a standing ovation for Arion Press, and looked around me and realized that he meant for each of the people that he was going to call to stand up. But then I thought maybe my inclination was right to begin with, and that we should all very briefly stand up and give Arion Press a standing ovation. Right. So I grew up in Northern Virginia, and at the time that I was in elementary school there, it was de rigueur for all elementary school children to be bused to Monticello. And that happened twice during my childhood in the late 60s. This time when I went to visit, it was a very different story that I heard about the place. And this time I also spent my time with a botanist and horticulturalist at Monticello. And this is what I wrote. Exotic flora. So the plants were ordered up, and they arrived not all at once to Monticello, with their distinguishing countenances, with their living physiognomies, not necessarily with souls. Let's not say with souls, for the word soul comes with too much of Christianity's violent history, with what we might call Christianity's own distinguishing countenances, while the transplants came with something other cultures have called the white breath of life, an exchange of molecules between living organisms, and the air and soil and sun. The transplants arrived with unimagined lives of their own. They were sourced from a far-off continent, an ocean away. Marseille figs, golden rain trees, China berries, Siberian mulberries, European larches, and from the dry slopes of North Africa, coxcombs and a kind of black poplar, its underside leaves white and downy, its leaf tops gleaming dark green, placed on his orders around Thomas Jefferson's distinguished property, Persian zinnias planted where Thomas Jefferson pointed, and in the nursery below his vegetable garden, 9 rows of chaste trees, Vitis agnus castus, native to the Mediterranean, a 10-foot-high paling fence of hand-riven chestnut rails and locust posts, joined by rose-headed iron nails, forged on the property to keep animals and the enslaved from the garden. They were shipped in packing crates, conveyed by ship, and then on a horse-hauled wagon and duly planted by those given to obey Thomas Jefferson's orders to drop them in a hole in the red dirt, the chaste trees conveyed from a far continent, subtropical, a cross-pollinating species, despite its name. From across the ocean, what a voyage, with no soil or sun and little air, a transplant moving in the world logarithmically faster and further than ever its kind had moved before, and over such distances, these chaste trees, whose roots, unbeknownst to Thomas Jefferson, contained memories in DNA and bacteria, and in thousands of years of organic interrelations that so slowly had evolved on a far continent, slowly subtropical, a lineage disrupted. What a journey across the ocean, and capable of cross-pollinating, although it would take soil and air and sun, and years before the chaste trees that survived flowered on Jefferson's distinguished plantation in the red Virginia dirt. And when they flowered and still flower, the purple of deep bruise.
Yeah, she Orlando White, that's your gene, Nanish Ejitraban, Nashla Aronaka, and Ambushes Chain, Trachini, that's a che, Arokiani, that's another equid out and Nanishla. This is my, I suppose my poetic protest to the Declaration of Independence. I think with the act of writing poetry, right, in collaboration with Page, there are so many visual possibilities, especially being, a Native American writer, being a Dene, being a Navajo, working, with my own language, my own thoughts, my own imagination in relation to English. So maybe first I will talk about the form of this poem, which is in 3 panels. So you have this shape of less than, right? And then you have this, you could say, sort of, yeah. And then you have greater than, all right? So that's the form, all right? Which is interesting because, what really influenced me for some strange reason in my mind was this thing called a Haskell alternative operator, right? Left or right operator, right? Using symbols that implements choice, right? Less than, greater than. So to give you some background in which inspired me to write this particular concrete poem, I was thinking about maybe the penman behind the scene. His name was Timothy Matlack. He was the one who, was the master penman behind the Declaration of Independence. He wrote, I guess what we would call English roundhand, right? This sort of beautiful cursive, his handwriting was just sort of, his style was pure cursive, in my opinion. It was just fluid, how he wrote the Declaration of Independence. It was like ligatures, fluid, right? Letters and words, mending together so elegantly, And obviously this became what is known as the American scribe font, which obviously, you can download right now. But that's what inspired me to write this particular piece in response to the Declaration of Independence. I just felt like the font, right? The style of the handwriting of Timothy Matlack, right? But in particular, I was thinking about, that the font lends itself, right, to the opposite and transitions of the words, in particular, merciless and merciful, right? I like the sort of transition between the merciless and the merciful. And if you don't know this in the Declaration of Independence, there are 3 words that pop up that every Native American or every Native person knows here in the so-called United States, right? Is merciless Indian savages, right? And so my project was just about let's play, right, with the language, right? Let's think about how we can subvert and transition, right, this idea of how we think about Indians, right, about Native Americans, about American Indians, about Navajos, about Sioux, about Apaches, right? And so, so that's what really inspired me was really Timothy Matlock's font type and how fluid it was, and how, because he wrote the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson, he just spoke stuff, in his resistance to the British Empire, and then complained about how the British were using, Indians, to help them out, but, I think for me in my response, it's really about, I like how the fluidity of this font, which is known as American Scribe, transitions from merciless to merciful. And then also, just really quick, I want to talk about, just the variations of the word Indian, right? In terms of, its etymological value, right? Over time, right? And then moves towards this idea of a contemporary version of it. When I was an undergrad at the Institute of American Indian Arts, I never heard the word Indian. I've never been referred to as being an Indian. But Native people, when I was at the Institute of American Indian Arts, they'd be like, hey, are you Indian? Like us Indians are like, this is how we are, And so it's like, Indian, right, is like our version of taking back that word of Indian, and also thinking about, the International Phonetic Alphabet in terms of sound when it comes to savages, savages, sauvage, right? Salvage, human, humane, humans. So I think really in the end, it's just really my, the way I think about those three particular words in the Declaration of Independence, because you can ask every native in so-called North America, right, about these three words, and they do not like these three words. And for me, I think one of the things I tried to do was just try to, say, hey, you know what? We are merciful, Indian humans. So, I don't know if it makes any sense. Yeah. Thank you.
What an honor to join you. About 4 years ago, I was driving my son from Vermont to Nashville, and we intentionally stopped in Charlottesville to take a tour of Monticello. I thought it would be an educational trip for my son and I. I didn't know you should buy a ticket in advance. So when we arrived, we only got to visit the gift shop, which was okay because my wife got a gift and she loves gift shops. So I was deeply honored when Ted and Jane Kaminsky, old friend, invited me to come and write a poem on this occasion and to get a tour with the staff there and the tour guides and Endrina and Andrew. And it was really a very moving experience to me. I realized the extent to which we are all caretakers. And as someone who grew up in Germantown, North Philadelphia, for whom Independence Hall, Constitution Center was our field trip, the presence of history was always felt, almost as if it was coming up out of those old city, those cobblestones. I felt as much walking the grounds of Monticello. And we know the opening words, but I was very happy that Ted remarked on the last words. We pledge ourselves to each other, our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor. And those lives for me was not just the lives of the living, but something that I felt there, which is we are also caretakers not only of this democracy, but also the lives of the human beings who contributed to the founding of this country. Among the living. All morning, I reached out my hands to Monticello's ghost. A felt path streaking by, eddies of leaves, echoes of voices in the architect's garden, were I to bend low to beds laid out like green coffins and press my heart to earth, and hear a heavy gallop of carriage horses, anvils striking nail rods, pollen settling on boots, or the swiveling arms of overseers flogging dark bodies. Between the guide's thoughtful lessons, I pursued history's fog, listening for a joiner's sigh, for a servant's listless song preserved on parlor walls where she dusted the architect's wares. I sought surges of their faint lives, something close to imaginings of a country that altered Albemarle fields into quiet moments like buried artifacts, whose values greater than crop yields. Dreams that restore Black limbs to self-evident truths out of a morally depraved system. His words. Bondage birthed my nation's fissures. Along Mulberry Road, past the Rivanna River, connecting Shadwell and Lego, no signs emerged of the misted valley. And no sprouted from solitary graves of slaves' burial grounds, just democracy's slanting light, as though from clouds filling the architect's domed oculus. Yet, when I walked the long cellar passage below, they came 100-fold. My drawn breath made shallow, a wind claimed my body. Voiceless, I sunk into its deep chill. And in the minute struck by the great clock, saw how the tour was coated with their presence. In Salome's cold stare, in a chambered alcove bed, a telescope, a double-barrel air pump, a polygraph, elliptical archways, all mark the architect's blurred lenses, his paradoxical mind that called into the spheres, no less brilliant, no less exegetical.
It's a pleasure to close the readings with Rita Dove's poem, who couldn't be here this evening. And I wanted to read her short note about the form. The project gave birth to a new hybrid poetic form that I've dubbed the hopscotch. It's a combination golden shovel and acrostic in which the beginning and end words of each line unit, when read in order, spell out the opening phrase of the preamble, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people and of the Declaration itself. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. The last word then circles back to the beginning. Torturous, yes, but ultimately, for this crossword and jigsaw puzzle enthusiast, deeply satisfying. The poem is in two parts. Declaration disrupted, Philadelphia, July 1776. When, if not now, you ask of the wind, and in the name of progress, reason flies out the window, suitably framed in the sunlit palladium brick of a Philadelphia afternoon. Already the course of the great experiment has careened off the rails. Even as beyond this hall, human events are being hammered out limb by limb, each life another body gauged and measured until it becomes commodity, cooper, cobbler, printer's aid. Each one pronounced necessary for producing waistcoats and almanacs, venison and ale, and yet none deemed fit meet for admission into the one people you claim to speak for. What a winsome amalgamation this is, your version of we. 2. We would say your pronouns suffer. We've watched you pacing the floorboards as you hold these particles of speech up to the light like barley sugars, sweetened truths to suckle on, while we sweep the inked scraps out of earshot. Lashed and bonded, this much should be self-evident even to you. We labor on, unheard but listening, deconstructing, realizing that all issued from your pulpit is a fractional word, a tabulation designed to ensure your flock that whole men are what we most assuredly can never be. Enlighten us then. What on God's earth have you ever created equal to a morning's porridge or those silver-buckled shoes? You demand freedom. For whom, we cry, and when? Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. If you would like to join us downstairs in the gallery, we have a reception for you. And thank you again for all of our poets, our artists, and coming to celebrate our first event of Declare.